Hello chess family, it's me National Master Jesse James, and today we're taking a look at rule number 22, the king must be active in the endgame. A very important rule that I believe does not get utilized much at the very low level of play. Of course, the king is definitely one of the strongest pieces in the endgame, as it's one of the few pieces left, and it has very good mobility, meaning it can move anywhere it really wants to. The problem is only one square at a time. But in endgame, you got to use all the pieces you have. Do not, do not forget to use your king. Let's go and take a look at a nice game here. The middle game is pretty interesting. We'll kind of run through it fast as, again, the most important thing we're going over is the king must be active in the end game. This is a perfect example of how Morphy was able to build up a very nice game, just winning the whole time. But even with that, he still needs to use his king in the end game to win the game. And the final idea is quite beautiful. So let's get started. Here we go. Pawn to e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, Morphy's Italian, bishop c5, against the bishop c5 variation. Hopefully you know what Morphy plays by now. Of course, he's going to go ahead and go for his Evans Gambit. Pawn to b4. And here, a very interesting move by George. We're going to go ahead and play pawn to d5. Not a very good move. What's the best move here for white? Should we take with the bishop or should we take with the pawn? Hopefully it's obvious enough. We should definitely take with the pawn, as when the pawn takes it attacks the knight, and now it is a forced move. Rather than bishop takes, well, it is threatening to take the knight, but it doesn't win material as they're both worth around the same amount. So, pawn takes, knight takes. And here, what should we do? Of course, we got a castle. Get that king to safety. The faster you get your king to safety, the faster you can start your middle game attacks. All right, next move up, knight to e7. And here's a question for you. Should we take the pawn on e5 here? Now, hopefully you saw last move, at least before castling, knight takes on e5 was actually a bad move because bishop d4 would fork the knight and the rook. That's why Morphy just goes ahead and castles. But here, can we take the pawn? Here, Mr. Morphy definitely does. Knight takes on e5 gets played. Here, bishop d4 is no longer working here. Can you find the refutation here? Feel free to push pause on the video if you want to. It's a very fun idea that gets played. In the game, bishop d4 was not played, but it's always good to ask yourself, what if my opponent does this? And here Morphy would have found the beautiful knight takes on f7. Well, if you don't take, you're just losing material. King takes and pawn to d6 check. Here black is all but forced to play knight e to d5. And now there's a few different ways to play here. c3 will do a nice fork, or if you want to, you can just go ahead and look about bishop takes d5, knight takes d5, and queen to h5 check, getting ready to take this knight next. And yeah, black's just in a heap of trouble here. Both variations are looking good to me. So, back to the game. Of course, bishop d4 did not get played, as knight takes f7 is a pretty easy move to find, at least at their level. Here, black just goes ahead and castles. So now, definitely bishop to d4 is a threat. But it's your turn. What are you going to do here? Let's control the center. Let's push back our opponent's pieces. We have an extra pawn there, so our center is already pretty strong. Of course, simple chess, pawn to d4, attacking the bishop. The bishop retreated to d6. And now, well, extra pawn is an extra pawn, so let's just defend it and keep developing our pieces. We're not sure if we will hold on or attain the pawn, but the idea is every move that they have to keep trying to win the pawn is going to take time away from their basic strategy, which is trying to attack you and develop their pieces, right? So holding on to the pawn is a good idea. Just know, don't give up your kingdom for the pawn, right? Here, knight c3, of course, defending the pawn, and bishop f5 developing with a threat. Here, bishop takes on c2. Bishop b3 just defending. And now an interesting idea again, pawn to a5. What does this do? We'll see in a second. Here Morphy just goes ahead and plays pawn to a3 attacking the knight. And here was George's idea. He plays pawn to a4. Any way that you take here will definitely give George an idea. Unfortunately, the idea is not too strong. In the game, knight takes a4 is played, which is definitely the best way to play. Be careful if you're thinking about playing bishop takes. There's two ideas here you can take a look at. You have the knight takes on d5, which is the main idea of what he was looking at. Or you might consider looking at rook takes on a4 here. Unfortunately, this does not work right away. As well, if knight takes on a4, bishop takes c2. The problem is that the knight will still be hanging at the end of this line. Okay, so simple chess. We go back to the regular game. Knight takes on a4. The d5 pawn does hang, but here comes another one. Your turn. What do? Control the center, look for some threats. Of course. Pawn c4. This is great. White was wanting to push the pawn anyways, but the knight was in the way. We just got a free tempo for it. But you have to watch out for George. George is definitely not going to be playing this Easy for you. Rook takes on a4. What do you think? Should we take the rook, or should we take on d5? Feel free to analyze this. Push pause if you want to. Remember, you don't get full points unless you calculate all the variations. All right, let's take a look and see what happens. Here in the game, Morphy chooses the simple c takes d5. That means the bishop takes a4 was not working. Bishop takes a4 is working, but a nice little rule to do, especially when you're in better positions, play simple chess. Don't go into complications because, well, whenever you're winning, you want to make the game as easy as possible. Whenever you're losing, that's when you want to complicate things. Here, after bishop takes a4, there's a lot of crazy variations here, and, you know, there's plenty of them are losing, and the other variations were just winning. Those are the games I like. The ones where I'm either going to win or I'm going to draw. Here, knight c3 gets played. You can see a fork against the queen and the bishop. Okay, well, now we got to move the queen. The queen only has one square to move to hold on to the bishop, so queen b3 gets played. And things get a little crazier after knight e2 check, king h1, knight takes d4, attacking both the queen and the bishop's attacking the knight over here. Now here, Morphy can hold on to the game, but it's very crazy here. I mean, gosh, you have to play queen e3? Ugh. Again, this is a way to play, but I like the way that Morphy plays in the game. Try to keep it simple, and do not go into complicated positions whenever you're winning. So here he simply took on d5, still up a pawn, and still making a threat. Rook a5 got played, definitely an inaccuracy here. The idea, of course, trying to take on d5, develop with a threat. Here there's two moves you can play, but I like Morphy's move, of course. He defends the pawn just nice and simple. Queen to f3, a double attack, attacking on d5, and also the bishop on f5. That's why you can't take on d5 right away, as the bishop would just hang. Okay, so bishop goes back to g6. Rook u1 just keeps developing. Bishop b4, a nice little trap here. Not too cunning if you ask me, but bishop b4 is attacking the rook, and of course you're asking yourself, wait, can't we just take that? Be careful, the rook will take on a1. Okay, so simple chess, let's just move the rook up. Knight f5, the new target is d4. I will tell you, George played a very nice game here against Morphy, making constant threats the whole time. Unfortunately for George, Morphy is the much stronger player here. Okay, d4 is being attacked. We know we need to develop a piece. Bishop b2, of course. This defends the rook and also defends on d4. So now we are threatening to take the bishop here on b4. All right, queen to a8. Again, George does not want to give up on this idea. Here, queen e8 starts a very nice battery and now says, you know what, you can't take my bishop because I will just back rank checkmate you. All right, what does Morphy play? Simple chess, of course. There's no need to go into complications when you are winning. g3. No more back rank checkmates. And now we're just going to continue moving forward nice and slow. Queen a7 here, a nice move. Possibly looking at trying to triple up, making Alekhine's gun, and putting constant pressure on this a3 pawn. All right, white to move. What do we do? Here, Morphy is able to transition into a very nice and easy endgame to win. How does he do that? Making trades, of course. Knight takes on g6, edge takes on g6, and rook to e5. This move looks a bit strange here, but here Morphy definitely has an idea. Black unfortunately misses it and plays bishop takes on a3. It looked like a free pawn. Can you find the move here that turns the game right around? Now Morphy is up an extra rook here. White to move. What do you play here to grab the advantage? All right, hopefully you found it. It's the beautiful pawn to d6. Why? Well, this rook right here is the main idea why this pin is not working, right? We would love to attack the queen, but the rook's in the way. So when you play d6, we're threatening to remove the defender. And now, really, black only has like one move to play here. That's not going to be losing the bishop right away. Well, he's going to go ahead and play bishop to b4. This is the only way to hold on to your bishop. But here, Morphy makes another nice idea. Rook takes, bishop takes. Now we see we're in a pin. And queen to d5. Oh, what a beautiful move. Adding more pressure on f7, but also putting pressure on a5. Here the transition into the endgame is quite remarkable. Pawn to b6, only good way to defend that bishop, although the bishop is now stranded over there on a5. And here, what do we play? Hopefully you see it. Passed pawns should be pushed. Pawn to d7 here. Queen a8, and Morphy's all but happy to trade queens here. But first things first, let's keep bettering our pieces. Queen takes a8 can get played. It's just kind of a lazy move here, as black wants that. So let's keep betting our pieces. The rook slides over to c1. The idea of taking on c7 is game over, as well the rook will get to c8 at some point, and it's going to be very hard to defend this square, as the pawn will be able to take back, and this rook really can't stop it. Queen takes on d5, bishop takes on d5, and pawn to b5. A nice move here trying to defend the c7 pawn with the bishop. Alright, what do we do now? Here Morphy just keeps bettering his position and keeps putting pieces where they need to be. Bishop to c6, defending the pawn and also getting ready to move the pawn forward over here on d4. Knight d6, d5. This bishop's not going anywhere, although it doesn't really have to go anywhere as well. It's holding on to this pawn right here. This is the win of the game right here. Although black does have a passed pawn over here, it's easily defended. Alright, bishop d2, rook to d1, bishop g5, f4, very nice move here, and the bishop only has one good square to go to. Bishop to d8, how is that possible? And mostly all in the endgames, black is just going to be losing here. So, bishop a3, a very nice idea. You can see this rook is all but terrible as it can't even move anywhere. Here Morphy already sees the winning idea and now sets it up. Pawn to f5, try and let the king into the game so you can guard this e8 square. One of the ideas in the future we're going to be seeing is getting the rook to e8. Alright, rook e1, king f7, bishop takes b5. Ooh, nice move there. Of course the knight can't take as well. This is just an easy win. Bishop takes, king takes, and this wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't for rook e8 check, now winning the bishop. And an easy game. Okay, that goes back to the main line. Rook to h8, bishop takes, pawn takes, rook to e8, and this is where you can really start looking at the position. I'll go to make one move just to make sure it's black to move. Rook f8, and now you can really take a look at this position and say, how do I win this position? These can be a bit drawish because we have the opposite color bishops. And you can see here, black will never want to take because, well, if you take, you'll just help them make a queen. But we need to get control over this d8 square. And this is where the study really begins. White to move. What do you play here to win? You have to come up with a winning plan here. Alright, hopefully you sat down for a second. You thought about it. How do you win this game? Very simple. The king must be active in the endgame. And, simple chess, where does the king need to get to control the d8 square? Once the king gets there, it's game over. What do you play? King f2, the king walk goes all the way over to c8. It's game over here, and amazingly enough, there's no way to stop the simple plan. Black will try to create some counterplay with like g5 and pushing over here on the king side, but as you can see, it's 1, 2, 3 pawns against 1, 2, 3. There's really not going to be any good trades here that won't make it equal. And this rook can't move anywhere without fear of being captured. This king is trapped within its own little fortress right here. So, let's get the king over to c8. Simple chess. Remember, the king must be active in the endgame. And here, the game is quite over. g5, king e3. You don't really want to take here, as this will only help open up the bishop, and maybe the king can escape. But even then, the king is tied down to the rook, so it's just game over. g4, king d3. Of course, the king is going to be getting over here through the queen side. Pawn g5, bishop c6, pawn takes, rook to g8. Again, whenever Morphy is ready, he can always trade the rooks here, although that is not to be recommended. If you do play something like rook takes g8, oh my gosh, you've already brought this position down, and now it will most likely be a draw. Oof. White does have a slight advantage, but because of the opposite color bishops, this is a very easy drawing situation, as you can just put your bishop back and forth. And you'll never be able to control the dark squares more because, well, you have a light square bishop. So be careful. Don't trade without a good reason. All right. King c4. The king just marches right over. King a6. King b7. And king c8. So you can see black really had nothing good to do than shuffle his pieces back and forth. Again, if he ever tried to play g3, you would simply just take. And the rook can never take there. If you try to take, then we just take on d8. It's going to be game over in a few moves. Oh my gosh. So king c8 got played. Black plays on for a few more moves, but again, the game is just over. Now you just go into winning king and pawn endgame. Rook takes, king takes, queen. Bishop takes, king takes, and that's about it. Here the king will simply scoop up this pawn and then push it across the board. And unfortunately for black, there's no kind of threats over here with g3. Well, hope you enjoyed this game. Remember, keep your king active in the endgame. Just because it's a king, it's not the weakest piece on the board, at least not in the endgame. I'll see you in the next video.